Hey there, welcome to Mike's Collection, episode 359. I'm Mike, and the part of my collection that I'm going to be talking about today is some new G.I. Joe classified figures from Hasbro. Now, I only have 4 figures to talk about today, so hopefully that will mean a shorter video, because I literally just finished doing a video where I was reviewing Godzilla figures, and I had 25 Godzilla figures to try to cram into an hour-long video. And yeah, so now I'm doing these G.I. Joes. And the reason I'm trying to hammer these videos out here is we are going into the last week of March. And at the end of March, we will be done the first quarter of 2025. And after each quarter, I always do a best action figures of the year so far. So in about a week, I plan to sit down with all my action figures from the first quarter of 2025 and do a bit of an elimination to get down to like the best so far. And those figures I will carry forward to my best of the year video at the end of the year. These are some of my favorite videos to do, so I'm excited to do my best of quarter one. However, I don't like showing you guys figures for the first time in the best of the year elimination videos, because then I'm tempted to talk about those figures and explain what I like about it, and it makes those videos longer than they need to be because they're already pretty long because I have a lot of figures to kind of eliminate. So I try to do an official review of every figure before I get to my end of quarter video. I'm definitely not going to get there with all of my figures, but getting these 25 Godzilla figures definitely helped. And now I'm going to review these 4 G.I. Joes. And yeah, then I'll still be left with a couple odds and ends, I think. A couple of DC superpowers maybe, but not a whole lot. So getting these videos posted before the end of the quarter will be good. Anyway, so G.I. Joe Classified. 4 new figures. Normally I wait till I have a few more figures than this to do a video. I kind of thought the heavy duty figure would be released by now because I know some people have had it in hand for weeks already. I'm not sure why my pre-order at GameStop still says that the figure is due in September. I definitely don't think it'll be that long. I kind of thought it would show up. It hasn't. Maybe it'll be here in a week or two, or maybe a month or two. I don't know. But for now, I have these 4 figures. It was a full wave of Joes. I won't even try and guess what wave number. I don't know if we're really doing that anymore. But it's a wave of new Joes. And it's a cool wave. I like all of these figures a lot. So far, I think Hasbro has been nailing it with their G.I. Joe classified figures. The amount of duds in that collection are very few. Most of the figures I really like. These guys here, I really like all of them. I don't know if there's anything I would change about any of these figures. They all look great. This is an interesting wave for me, though, because those of you who have watched my past videos, you may have heard me talk about my brother, Doug. He's my older brother by 2 years. We shared a bedroom like our whole young lives, and we collected everything together. So we always played together, and when it came to G.I. Joes, Transformers, He-Man, wrestlers, anything, we'd see a new wave of figures, and we'd kind of do pixies on who was going to get what. So he would say, I'm getting Cobra Commander, and I'd say, well, then I'm going to get Hawk, and he's going to get Destro, and I'm going to get whoever. So we had like pretty much all the toys we could ever want when we were kids, but our collections are always halved. So when I moved out on my own and I'm displaying my G.I. Joes, I'm like, man, I've got a glaring hole in my G.I. Joe collection. I don't have Cobra Commander. I don't have Destro. I don't have Skeletor. I don't have Megatron. Like all the figures that my brothers had, I was missing out on. In the more modern versions of all those collections, I just collect everything on my own. So now I've got plenty of Skeletors in my Masters of the Universe collection. I've got plenty of Megatrons in my Transformers collection over here. But these are all more modern versions. I still don't have most of those characters in vintage toy form. Anyway, so when it comes to G.I. Joes and Transformers and He-Man and anything, I always get a little bit more excited about getting new versions of characters that I had as a kid. I always just grew more attached to those characters because, I played with those characters and I kind of got to live in their heads and create their personalities. So even though some of the characters that my brother had, like Destro or Skeletor, might have been really key characters, I just never really got to play with them and really, live out their personalities as a kid. So I just don't have quite that same personal connection to them. Um, anyway, so this line of figures here, this is rare because every one of these figures is like a Doug figure. I didn't have any of these guys personally myself when I was a kid. So even though they're great figures, there is a little bit of a nostalgic like a distance between me and these guys just because I look at them and I'm like, these are Doug's guys. But anyway, that's really neither here nor there. I'll start with my favorite of the bunch. So this here is Zandar. So this here is Zartan. He's the kind of master of disguise. He's sort of a member of Cobra, but really he leads a gang of bikers called the Dreadnoks, and he's more an associate of Cobra, who kind of like a mercenary that Cobra seems to like kind of hire out the Dreadnoks when they need some, some street level stuff done. And so when we were kids, my brother had Zartan, and then when it came to his first three henchmen, which was Buzzer, Ripper, and Torch, I had Buzzer and Ripper. My brother had Torch. So, he had two of the Dreadnoks. I had two of the Dreadnoks. And, as it went on, my brother got Thrasher and I got Road Pig. He got Zanzibar and I got Nagahide. So we were always kind of split down the middle. And then in 1986, they introduced Zartan's siblings, who were twins. So there was Zarana and Zandar. So I got Zarana, and she is my favorite G.I. Joe character. It's hard for me to really pick because I love so many of them. But if I had to pick, Zarana is my favorite G.I. Joe character of all time. She's this kind of punk rock chick. I thought she was really cool. She had quite a bit to do in the cartoons and in the comic books. So not only was it a character that I enjoyed like kind of playing with, but like she had a personality that was fleshed out in media. Zandar, on the other hand, who my brother had, he didn't get nearly as much attention in media. I don't really remember him doing much of anything in the cartoons, and in the comic books, he was kind of overshadowed as well, which is kind of ironic because maybe like Larry Hama is the guy that wrote pretty much every issue of the G.I. Joe comic book in the 80s, and he also wrote the file cards that were on the back of the vintage action figure blister cards. And on Zandar's blister, his file card back in the 80s, it said something like, nobody can ever seem to remember this guy. He's like very forgettable and he like slinks into the background and you kind of forget about him. And maybe he wrote that intentionally, saying, I don't really know what I'm going to do with this guy. I'm just going to kind of ignore him. I don't know. It might have just been him trying to give him something interesting, some interesting traits. But the fact that he does seem to have been largely ignored in media, I don't know. Maybe that just kind of speaks to Larry Hama not knowing what to do with this guy either. A lot of the Dreadnoks, they were punkers, but especially some of the later ones, they had this kind of piecemeal armor on. They looked like something out of like the Road Warrior, and I don't think that was a coincidence. I'm pretty sure they have the designers have said that they were influenced by like the characters in Mad Max to come up with a lot of these Dreadnought characters. And so Zandar kind of had that vibe a little bit. He's got some face paint on. He's got a bandana. He's shirtless with kind of mismatched armor. Um, yeah, I don't know. I've always liked this guy, partly because he's the brother of my favorite character. And whenever me and Doug played with G.I. Joes together, like they would always be paired up. Always be doing missions together and stuff. So yeah, I really like Zandar almost by default, just because of his close relation to the character that I really like. But even in the toys, Zarana has always got a lot more attention. I'm not sure how many versions off the top of my head there are of Zarana, but there's only two versions of Zandar prior to this. So in the vintage toy line, there was one Zarana, one Zandar. That's not uncommon in the vintage toy line. A lot of characters only get made once. But then when G.I. Joe got kind of revived in like 2002 in what we call the new sculpt era, so there was new toys and there was new comic books. So in the new toys, Zarana got a couple of new updates. but her brother got none. He was completely overlooked during that era of action figures. And then when we got the modern 4-inch, I still want to call them modern, but that doesn't really work anymore. In 2007, what we used to call the modern line of G.I. Joes, which is a 4-inch line of G.I. Joes, they came out, and Zorana got 2 different variations in that toy line as well. And it took a while, but Zandar did eventually get one. So yeah, he's definitely got fewer figures than his sister. His sister came out in G.I. Joe like 2 years prior to this figure coming out, so he was obviously less of a priority for the Hasbro team. But anyway, I'm very happy to finally get him. Like I said, I've always liked this character, and I think this is the best he's ever looked. They kept the design similar to the 1986 figure, who I have here, and I'll do a bit of a side-by-side comparison. They've kind of some of the colors are a little more muted. Like this blue is a lot more of a. It looks better, I guess. It was almost like a neon blue, a really really bright sky blue on the vintage figure, and I like that they've got kind of a darker. I don't know what kind of blue this is. It's kind of like a grayish blue. The vintage toy also had like really light gray pants with a yellow belt. This guy's opted for darker gray pants with a brown belt. So he's definitely not as visually striking, but I think that's okay. I think he's still got some flair. He's still got his pink like neckerchief. He still gets some of that red paint on his face, the long orange hair. He's got some cool gold accents. Like he's got these skulls on his shoulder pads. It's a cool design. I like he's got a really cool knife that sheathes on his leg. He's got a couple of, I don't know what's this in his backpack. I don't know if those come out or not. It doesn't look like they do. But yeah, he's got some stuff in his, maybe those are extra spears for his spear gun, I guess, in his backpack here. He's got another knife that sheathes on the back of his belt, just under the backpack. It's a cool figure. He's got some tats on his arm that he didn't have before. And yeah, he's got chest armor, which is nice. The original version was bare chested with these red lightning bolts running down his chest. And then even the version that we got in the 4-inch line, he kept a lot of those same design elements as the vintage toy. Still had the bare chest with these red lightning bolts painted on the front of it. Maybe they were supposed to be tattoos, but they're pretty lame tattoos if that's what they were. I always just kind of thought of them as paint that he just kind of ran on himself. This version just looks a lot better. He's a little more armored up. I can take him a little bit more seriously. And yeah, it was just a long time coming with this guy, and I'm happy to have him. Hopefully we get some more of the key dreadnoughts. They've already teased that Monkey Wrench is due out next. He's another important character, and he's one of my guys, so I'm happy to get Monkey Wrench. Yeah, hopefully Thrasher and Zanzibar follow suit. Anyway, just cool to add another original character, another Dreadnought, another member of Cobra, another, the final sibling from Zartan and Zorana. He fills kind of a lot of holes in the collection all at once. And so, yeah, he's very exciting. So, yeah, the original Zandar was from 1986. Now, 2 of the other figures in this wave were also 1986 figures, which again is kind of odd. We haven't had a full wave of figures of all of Doug's characters before until now, nor have we had a full wave of figures that were all based on 1 year of release. And the 4th character in this wave is actually a 1990 figure, so he's the odd man out. But the fact that we got 3 out of 4 from 1986 just struck me as a little odd, but I'm happy to get these figures because G.I. Joe was still at the top of its game in 1986. So this here is Leatherneck. So this guy, he's pretty cool. Again, he was one of my brother's guys when we were growing up. And he's not one that I had any particular attachment to because he looks very real-world military. Now, if you are a real-world military guy, I'm sure you could probably point out a dozen things that are wrong with him, like, oh, he would never have short sleeves or whatever. I don't know. But to me, he's wearing green. His weapons are black. He doesn't have a goofy ninja sword or anything. There's nothing crazy about this guy. I don't remember what his file card said back in the 80s, but I don't think it was anything particularly interesting. Like some of those guys had really unique features that Larry Hama gave them, and they've stuck in my head. Like Barbecue, the GI Joe firefighter, he's able to open bottle caps with his ears. That was something that was on the file card, and that just always stuck in my mind, like it was supposed to, because they want you to think of these characters as individuals. When it comes to Leatherneck, I don't really remember him being interesting or unique or anything. He's a military guy. He looked like a military guy, and that's fine. Now I have the vintage Leatherneck here. I've got a little baggie here. None of my smaller Joes are on display anymore, unfortunately. I had to make room for newer collections like Classified. But I'm happy to report that my Leatherneck is still in one piece. A lot of my vintage G.I. Joes are not. But looking at him, like this figure does a really, really good job of translating the vintage toy into a modern figure. They haven't changed much at all. The colors are a little muted. Like this guy's green is a little bit brighter, but otherwise the changes are so minimal. Like the newer one has knee pads, the older guy doesn't, but the sleeve length is longer. Like this guy clearly has long sleeves that are just kind of rolled up halfway up his forearm, whereas this guy's got like full short sleeves. Minor change. But the accessories are similar. This guy had a backpack and a rifle. This guy's got a backpack and a rifle. He's got a knife that can be sheathed up on his vest. So sheathed upward, which my buddy Chad, who often co-hosts these videos with me, he loves the upwards knife sheath, and it is pretty cool. He's got a pistol that's holstered on his hip. Yeah. The only major difference that this figure has that the vintage one didn't is he has optional goggles. I don't know why they decided to give him goggles. I don't mind that they gave him goggles. If I want him to look like his vintage figure, I could take the goggles off. But they happen to look pretty good on him. They fit snug. Oftentimes with removable glasses, they sit weird. For example, the G.I. Joe Classified Buzzer, one of the Dreadnoks, he's got removable glasses, and I just can't get them to sit right on his head. You know, one of the arms is always poking off, and so I just display him without them, which is kind of a bummer because he was known for having them. This guy here, he's not known for having glasses or goggles, but they look really good. They sit on his face properly. So, yeah, I'm pretty pleased with him. Now, I do have other Leatherneck figures that I could kind of compare to, but for a long time, this guy kind of got, I don't know, some shitty figures, I would say. Like the first one was good. The first one was iconic. Then they did a couple other versions of him, which were just less interesting. And then when it got to the 4-inch style of G.I. Joes, they kept repainting like Gung Ho into Leatherneck, like they were using Gung Ho's head. So it was hard to look at this figure and say it's Leatherneck because it just looks like Gung Ho. But pretty late in the line, I think it was 2014, so 7 years in, we got a new version of Leatherneck, which I'll do a side-by-side of him here. And I loved that figure because he was really tall. In the vintage toy line, all the G.I. Joes were the same height. You couldn't really get any differences. In the 4-inch line, they were able to offer a little bit more different body shapes. So some guys were a little bit buffer, some guys were a little bit taller. Anyway, this Leatherneck figure was really tall. The sculpt on him was really sharp. It was a really, really nice upgrade. And I really loved this figure when I first got it. I don't think it lives up to this guy. If I only could keep one Leatherneck in my collection, it would be this one. But yeah, the previous figure was quite nice as well. So yeah, not much more to say about this guy. He's cool. I like him. We will move on to another 1986 release, another figure that my brother Doug had. This is Dialtone. Now, this is another guy. I don't remember any real specifics of him character-wise. I do remember him from the cartoon, and I don't know, when I look at Dialtone, maybe it's because he's got a beret on. I always kind of want to think he's French, but he's not. I can remember his voice from the cartoon. So yeah, he's not French. But yeah, I always liked this guy. If anything, my only beef with him was that he was, I believe his specialty is the G.I. Joe like communications specialist. He's got this kind of futuristic backpack. At least it was futuristic back in 1986. Um, and I like him. His design is unique. You know, he had the beret, he's got the mustache. The color of his costume didn't look like anybody else's. So he was a unique character, and I was happy to add him to our ranks. But I didn't like when it felt like a character was replacing another character who we also really liked. So in the original wave of G.I. Joes back in 1982, the communications guy was a character called Breaker, who had a brown beard. And all the G.I. Joes back then just wore plain green outfits. They were kind of boring, arguably. And by 1986, there was a lot of new kids discovering the brand that probably didn't have access to the figures from 1982 and 83. So they were upgrading some of those specialties. So like Doc was the original medic, but in 86 we got Lifeline, who was a new medic. And a couple years later we got Stretcher, who was a new medic. The G.I. Joe like Arctic Trooper. The first one was Snow Job in 83, but I believe it was 86 that we got Iceberg. So there was something about these guys, like I don't like them replacing the old guys, because Breaker I had a particular fondness for. He was the first G.I. Joe me and my brother Doug ever owned. Technically it was Doug that owned him, but he looked like our dad, because our dad was in the military and he had a full brown beard. So when we first got that Breaker toy, we always associated it with my dad. So this guy here, I kind of look at Dialtone and think this is the guy that tried to take my dad's job. But anyway, in our G.I. Joe team, there was always room for 2 communications specialists. So no big deal. It's not like we stopped playing with Breaker just because we got Dialtone. So yeah, so there's that. But this figure looks great. I don't really have any issues with him. I have the vintage one here somewhere. He's also still in one piece, which is nice. Comparing the two, yeah, it is pretty spot on as far as the design goes. Yeah, he's got some fun accessories. He's got a gun that's similar to his old one, which, by the way, I don't know if I'm supposed to say that on YouTube. I've seen other videos where people will say things like, oh, his pew pew, and they won't say the G word. I don't know if that, by saying that, YouTube, I don't know, doesn't suggest my channel or something, so maybe I shouldn't say that. But anyway, hopefully I can say his weapon, his firearm, whatever. So it seems to match pretty closely to the vintage one. He's also got this little, I don't know, this little weapon with a little dish on the end, which I don't know, maybe that's so he can pick up sounds from far away. His backpack, he's got this little communication piece that slides down over his mouth. He's got a little walkie-talkie there. I don't think it's removable, but he does have like a little data pad, like a little cell phone, I guess, that slides into his belt that is removable. His beret comes off, which is nice, because I don't think we've ever seen that on any of the past Dialtones. I think there's been probably in the ballpark of like 10 different Dialtone figures over the years, I think. And none of them, as far as I know, have had removable berets. So this is a first for him. And he looks good with his hat off. I like that you can take hats off these characters and they don't look weird when you put them back on. In the old days, if you were going to give somebody a removable hat, it usually had to be kind of oversized. They've done a really good job of making the hats look believable. I actually don't know if I talked about that with Leatherneck, because his hat is also removable, which I think is a first. I don't believe the hat was removable in any of the past versions, so that is a plus. I've actually got Dialtone's file card packaged right with my vintage toy. I don't always do that. Let me see, anything interesting on this? By the way, his real name is Jack Morelli, if you're curious. One of the scariest things that can happen to you out in the field is to lose contact with your base. That means you are alone. No artillery support, no airstrikes, no medvac, no extraction, no nothing. The cavalry ain't coming until the man with the radio tells them to. So that's his little bio. Nothing particularly interesting or personal about him. So anyway, that's Dialtone. I do have other versions of him. Interestingly enough, I'll show you in the split screen, but in the 4-inch line, I have a Tiger Force version of Dialtone, and then I also have a female version of Dialtone. There was a time when Dialtone was a woman in the comic books. That was back when IDW was doing the comic books. Now that Skybound is doing the G.I. Joe comic books, we haven't seen Dialtone yet, but when we do, I imagine he'll be back to his better known male version. But anyway, yeah, that's that. And I guess I will, while I'm talking about G.I. Joe comic books, everybody talks about the Marvel comic books, which ran, all throughout the 80s. And that's what a lot of Joe fans my age are most nostalgic for. The cartoon was kind of silly, but the comic books were a little bit more serious because writer Larry Hama had a military background and he used a lot of like real like military jargon and stuff. So it felt a lot more real, a lot more serious. And a lot of times people seem really excited about these new comics from Skybound. And I think a lot of people are kind of overlooking some of the comic books that came in between. For example, like IDW, they were pretty hit and miss with their G.I. Joe comic books. But I think they did some fantastic things with their Transformers comic book. And I hope a lot of people that are really loving the new Skybound comic book maybe go back and look at what IDW did. And even Dreamwave before IDW. Because Dreamwave had Transformers for a little while, and they did some pretty cool stuff too. But anyway, getting back to G.I. Joe, after Marvel stopped publishing G.I. Joe and it went dormant for a number of years, probably a good decade or more, it was around 2002 when the toys came back that a new company like Devil's Due got the license to do G.I. Joe comic books. And they decided to pick up the storyline where Larry Hama's Marvel comic book had left off. So they didn't try and reboot it and, start telling a new story about the G.I. Joe team being formed. They were basically saying that enough time had passed, like 10 years had passed in like real time, but now the G.I. Joe team was kind of coming back together to fight a reformed Cobra. And they told some really interesting stories. And maybe it wasn't all great, but I remember really liking most of it. And one thing that stands out was Zandar actually had a bit of a cool story in the Devil's Due comic books. And I don't think he's ever really been given a chance to shine by anybody else other than Devil's Due. It's been a long, long time since I've read them, but essentially Cobra splintered into two factions. So there was like Serpentor had a group called the Coil, and Serpentor and Cobra Commander had Cobra. And I think Zandar, he joined the Coil at one point. And anyway, I'll have to revisit it. I just remember I was stoked at the time to see Zandar finally getting something important to do in the comic books. So just a little shout out to Devil's Due and to IDW. So let's talk about the last figure here. So this is a 1990 figure. And I think I said before that these were all Doug figures. This was not actually a Doug figure. Neither of us had this figure. So I look at this wave of figures and I don't have that same personal attachment to them as I do my characters. But neither me or Doug have a whole lot of attachment to this guy, at least not the vintage toy. So 1990 was the year that we stopped collecting G.I. Joe. We were all in from the very beginning. When it came to 82 to 89, we had all of the basic figures. We didn't have all the vehicles. We had a lot of them, but we had all the basic figures. 1990 was the year that we said, are we going to keep doing this? They're redoing a lot of characters. Like it's like another version of Snake Eyes or Storm Shadow. They were starting to get into some of the goofier, like neon colors and stuff that really kicked off in the last couple of years. 1990 really wasn't too bad. And looking back now, I'm kind of surprised that was the year we decided to jump ship because there were a lot of decent figures that year. But I bought one 1990 figure in Rampart. My brother got Undertow, and that was it. We said, we're not getting any more 1990 figures. So the vintage Saw Viper, who I have here. So he was this guy. He's kind of weird looking. He's kind of this pinkish purple outfit with this green cycloptic visor with a really, really oversized gun, which is my understanding that it was a mistake. because a lot of toys get molded at a larger size, so it's easier for the designers to build the mold, and they call those 2-ups usually because they're 2 times bigger than they're supposed to. And then when the toy goes into production, they get shrunk down. My understanding is that the Saw Viper's gun was sculpted in the 2-up and then it accidentally went into production that way without being shrunk down to fit him. So he has a ridiculously oversized gun. Now, that I don't know for sure that that's true, but it wouldn't surprise me. But at the same time, I also wouldn't be surprised if Hasbro just released the gun that size, because that was another problem with the later years of G.I. Joe. The guns were getting ridiculously oversized. I kind of assumed it was a bit of a trend because in the comic books back then, all the characters like the Punisher and Cable were all carrying like really, really big oversized machine guns. So that just sort of seemed to be a sign of the times. A lot of G.I. Joes were coming with big guns that launched missiles. So in order for that mechanism to work, the gun had to be really big. So yeah, Saw Viper's gun is comically large, but not really out of line with other G.I. Joes that were coming out around the time. So anyway, Saw Viper, didn't really do a whole lot for me. He's fine. But what was interesting about him is in the G.I. Joe comic books, and this is back when Marvel still published it. This was the original run of comic books. Very, very rarely did anybody die in the comic books. It happened once in a while, and it was usually with characters that maybe Larry Hama either created himself, so there wasn't a toy of this character, so sometimes Larry created characters, I think, almost so he could kill them. And there were a couple times when characters that he just didn't like, he was forced to put into the comic book as kind of a promotion for Hasbro, but if he wasn't mandated to do anything more with them other than include them, he killed them. And that really, the time that really sticks out in my mind is when Battle Force 2000, who was a team of 6 guys that had futuristic vehicles and futuristic armor. Larry Hama didn't like them, so they showed up in a storyline and they all got blown up. But generally, G.I. Joes did not die, especially fan favorite characters. But there was an issue of G.I. Joe where a bunch of G.I. Joes got captured, and the Saw Viper, and again, he wasn't even a unique character. Saw Viper was just a generic soldier, just like a Cobra Blue Shirt or a Cobra Viper or a Cobra Strato Viper or, Heat Viper, anything, just a generic soldier. He had a bunch of Joes captive, and he opened fire on them, and he killed a bunch of named G.I. Joes, including Doc, who was one that I really liked, so I was not happy about Doc getting killed, but it was also Crankcase and Thunder, a couple other guys, and it was pretty shocking to have named G.I. Joes get killed, and especially by nobody like a Saw Viper. So that really kind of elevated the Saw Viper in a lot of people's eyes as being a little bit more significant than most other troopers in G.I. Joe. And then when Devil's Due took on the G.I. Joe license, they actually followed up that storyline because not much really came of the Saw Viper after he killed those Joes. I think it was alluded to that Storm Shadow killed him, although I don't know if they ever showed it on panel. But anyway, in the Devil's Due comic book, they actually gave that one Saw Viper a name. And he kind of became his own thing, and he was kind of notorious amongst the Cobras for being the guy that killed all those Joes. And then I think he got blown up, nearly killed, and then they rebuilt him as a cyborg, and he became Overkill, which was a character that already existed in the G.I. Joe toy line. But he was supposed to be the leader of the Cobra Bat army. So when the first Overkill figure came out, you just thought he was another bat, another full-on robot. But when Devil's Due got the comic book, they said, he's not just another bat. He's got the Saw Viper built into him as like a cyborg. And so again, they really elevated not just the Saw Vipers in general, but this particular character. So I'm kind of tempted to buy more of this guy because with a lot of the troopers, I do buy multiples, maybe just 2 or 3 so I can have a little squad. But I'd kind of like to have one of these guys that I can kind of almost separate it out and say, this is the guy. And then I can have a couple other troopers. Maybe those guys I could display with their helmets on. And this guy I can display with his helmet off to kind of separate him. So maybe I'll just mention that quickly. You can take off his helmet. And then he's got kind of a black balaclava mask underneath. So you can see his eyes and his mouth. He looks pretty cool. The first time they did that was in the the 2002 line. So we don't get to talk about that era of toys very often, the new sculpt years. So this is when the 3 3/4 inch figures got revived, but it was before the 4-inch figures launched in 2007. So there was a couple of years there called the new sculpt years, and we got a new version of Saw Viper. He's in black and maroon. The colors looked a lot better in my mind than the vintage figure. But this is the first time that he had a removable helmet, and you actually get to see his face underneath the helmet. And then when they did move on to the 4-inch line of Joes, there was 3 different variations of the Saw Viper. There was a standard like purple one, then there was kind of a pink one, and then there was a Python Patrol one. And all of them had the removable mask, but instead of being able to see his full face, he had a black balaclava face underneath. And so that's what they've gone with here. So now that gives me another idea. Maybe if I did buy three of this guy, I could maybe display 2 of them, either with their balaclava or with their helmet. And then maybe I could take a third one and pop the head off and give him an unmasked head. Because I have lots of extra heads kicking around, mostly like Marvel Legends heads and stuff. That would probably fit on here. I don't know. Just an idea. I really probably shouldn't be buying multiples of figures these days because, times are tight. Times are tight. Anyway, the Saw Viper looks great. Sure, he's still wearing purple, different shades of purple, almost not quite pink, but like magenta maybe. It's not the most scary color you would expect a guy to wear, but I've gotten so used to it now. Since 1990, the Saw Viper, this is his look. So I actually kind of would prefer this look over the black and maroon one because this is just the classic look. Although if they repaint this figure in black and maroon, I wouldn't mind that. But I think what is more likely to happen is that we'll get this figure repainted in Python Patrol colors because we've already got a bunch of Python Patrol repaints in the classified line. So it would make sense. You've already got this figure. You might as well find a way to make a little bit more money from it. As far as accessories goes, he's got a big backpack. He's got a big gun with a bullet belt that goes from the gun into his backpack. I don't know anything about these type of weapons, but the Saw Viper, it's supposed to stand for semi-automatic weapon. So yeah, that's, I guess, what he's got here. He's also got a knife that's sheathed under his backpack. He's got a little pistol on his hip. He's got this neck piece that you can remove. It kind of hovers around him here. It's kind of awkward. But yeah, I don't mind it, I guess. But yeah, some people might want to remove it because, yeah, it does just kind of hover around, kind of weird. On his gun, he also has a chainsaw, which I just dropped from here, but you'll see it on the insert. So yeah, I like this guy quite a bit. I'm glad that we got him. He's pretty cool. I don't know if I have a whole lot more to say. So I still managed to go for about 40 minutes. So that's good. At least I kept it under an hour. I did kind of want to do a shorter video. I'll be honest, since I just did this video back to back with my Godzilla video, my throat's a little dry. I'm kind of happy to wrap this up a little bit early. Yeah, if I think of anything I missed, maybe I'll plug in some insert shots or something. But otherwise, that's it. Those are my latest G.I. Joe classified figures. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, subscribe, comment, tell your friends, share the video, whatever. I'll see you next time. Ciao.